YouTube metal community, Boston fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about Boston's debut album, Boston, released on Epic Records in 1976, August 25th of that year. Not only is this one of the, you could arguably say one of the best-selling albums of all time, with over 25 million copies of this thing sold worldwide, 17 of those, 17 million in the US. Holy moly. It was one of the fastest-selling debut records of all time at that point. It's still up there as one of the most fastest-selling debuts. And for the longest time there, it was the best-selling debut until Appetite for Destruction came out by Guns N' Roses in the late 80s. So, also, I'm a huge fan of this album. It's totally a staple of classic rock radio. To the point where almost every song is a single, besides Hitch a Ride. That didn't get played too much on the radio stations I grew up with, but for the most part, everything else on this thing is a smash hit. It's like a greatest hits album. It's unbelievable. And the second amazing part of this album, that most of it was basically conceived by Tom Scholz. Brad Delp definitely did a lot of the help too, especially obviously because he sang, but he did co-write a couple of songs here. But for the most part, like a lot of the guys that started with this band, long story short, like in the early to mid-70s, Tom was working for Polaroid and forming bands, making demos in his basement, sending out these demos, getting rejected numerous times, to the point where the guys in the band were like, you know what, this isn't happening, we're going to leave. And so basically it was down to Tom. And he got to the point where he was like so focused on trying to make something happen that he like took money he had saved up for a better house. He bought a better recording deck. He put all his money into his gear and instruments and had a really nice studio set up for himself in his basement, even though it would flood sometimes. But he worked really hard and put in enough time and effort to make these songs come alive. So he got to the point where he was like, you know what, I can't sing these things, I need Brad back. So he said, hey man, I know you might not want to do this because it's not making money for you right now, but at least just come down and sing for me. Just do that. So we came down, sang some songs, they put out the demo, and then finally Epic/CBS got wind of this thing and said, you know what, let's try this out. And said, okay guys, come to LA. And Tom was like, no, we're going to record it in my studio, in my basement, where I know how to do everything. I work alone, this is my gig, I know what I'm doing. And they're like, well, okay. And so basically, it turned out to be this whole back and forth thing between Tom, Boston, and the record company, thinking things were actually happening in LA, but most were happening over in Boston. And like they had a guy go back and forth saying, like, oh yeah, they're in LA, they're doing it, they're fine. Meanwhile, most of it was done in Boston. Except for the last song on here, Let Me Take You Home Tonight, written by Brad, that was actually done in the studio, basically to kind of appease the record company, showing that like, all right, yeah, we're here, just to let you guys know, we're actually in LA. Meanwhile, 99% of the album was done in Boston. So Tom actually redid a lot of the songs from the demo tapes, just the same guitar parts, same drums, same everything over again, but for the new album. So they got signed like a 10-year deal for 6 albums, and their recording pace is a hell of a lot slower than most other bands. I mean, the second album came out a couple years later, which isn't too bad, but I mean, back then that was like an eternity. And then the third album came out in the mid-'80s, which that is a longer point in that time. 7 or 8 years is definitely a gap in time, but this truly is an amazing album. I mean, like, every song on it is great. It's definitely one of those classic albums you can put the whole thing on and enjoy every single song. So with that said, More Than a Feeling opens this album up, and total classic. What can you say? It's got that fade in with that really cool acoustic guitar. The drums come in, the vocals are a little bit chill, but then like things just slide into the rockness of it. The guitar slides, the hand claps, the insane vocals, the slipped away part. Like there's so much of this song that just begs you to listen to it. And it's just captivating. They created this sound, this Boston sound, which a lot of people in the industry, or not really in the industry, but like reviewers, started to say that like, while this was a really cool sound, they said it influenced other companies to make bands that sounded like this, which is the case for most modern music. That's kind of how things work. But Yeah, it's one of those songs where like you hear it and then you think, wow, this was recorded in someone's basement. Like, how the hell did they do that, or how did he do that? Peace of Mind is the second song on here, and again, another classic rock staple. But it's got the more of the soaring harmonies throughout this thing. Really, really catchy hooks. The chugging guitar riffs that go on forever. It's just a really cool, crunchy rock sound. He was definitely influenced by the Kinks and a lot of the '60s garage rock bands. But then to incorporate like the soaring vocal part of it, maybe he was a Beach Boys fan, maybe he liked the early Eagles albums, maybe he was a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young fan. There's a whole lot of influences that go into making this album as big of a rock sound that it is. It's a very musical album. It's not just like dumb radio rock with a bunch of guitars and drums. Like, there's a hell of a lot of thought, careful precision, and really well executed musicianship on this thing that proves that it will stand the test of time. I mean, this thing was still selling well up until 2003 when it was awarded the 17 times platinum status. So this album proves time and time again that good music will span generations. It doesn't matter when it came out, it's always going to be good music. Foreplay in Long Time. Excuse me. Tom actually started writing the song Foreplay when he was in college at MIT, so that was kind of an experiment he was working on back then. And then formed Long Time out of that one. But excellent soloing. The singing on this song is just joyous. The harmonies on it are fantastic. That classical intro with Foreplay is definitely based on the classical tradition, all these organs and stuff. Very, very fun build up to get to this rock song, to have this sort of intelligent classical piece in the front of it. And it's also a testament to the work itself that also gets played on the radio. Not just the Long Time bit, but the Foreplay part also gets played on the radio. So I think this just came out in a time where rock radio was, disco was blowing up at this point, but rock radio was still coming out of the late 60s, early 70s feel when FM was a new thing. You can play like a side of an album and just play that. That's side one is only 3 tracks long, but it's just absolutely brilliant. It's just a smash. 1, 2, 3 punch. Side two, you start off with Rock and Roll Band, which is the only song on the album with drums by original drummer Jim Masdea, I think is how you pronounce his last name. Who would later go on to play with them once in a while, literally for that song, come out on stage and like play that one song and just walk off again, which is weird. But Tom asked him to play drums on that song. And I really like his drumming on the song in particular. It's very, very fun. The very Zeppelin-style guitar riffs throughout this thing are great. And again, you get more of that bright, soaring vocal melody. That is just a staple of this album. And I will say that for each and every song because it's super important to the structure of this band. That was such an element that kept them apart from everybody else and really makes them stand out. Like when you hear a Boston song on the radio, you know it's them. You know those voices, you know those harmonies, you know that guitar tone, that crunch, the snap of the snare. The whole production element screams this album. And you don't get things like that anymore. We can just listen to someone's playing and go, oh, that's Boston. Or, man, those drums sound really good. Or those dueling guitar solos, that's totally Boston. Just like you can tell a Joe Perry riff when Aerosmith comes on. You can tell when Jimmy Page comes on. You can tell when Jimi Hendrix comes on. It's just one of those things where you know someone's style. Angus Young from AC/DC, the whole thing is just they're playing. You might not know their names, but you recognize that tone and that style. And that's very much an aesthetic with Boston. Smokin', I think, is one of my favorite songs on this album, and it's just such a fun song because you get this long, giant jam in the middle with crazy organs going up and down, the rock guitars underneath it, the swellings, dynamics that happen throughout this thing. The drums are really tight, and it's just a fun, rocking track. The interweaving instruments that lock into each other and kind of egg each other on to get to the next part, very, very fun. And it sounds like you're driving down the road. It sounds like you're cruising along. It sounds like you're about to go to the next show or something. It's a continuation of that rock and roll band vibe that I really, really enjoy. And to go back to rock and roll band, I love that story about just like building up a band and going out on the road, trying to make it. You meet people, you lose people, you get the attention of record companies. It's a cool story. It's definitely a 70s rock and roll thing. I really like that story. But Smokin' is cool too. Just a head-bobbing good time the whole way through. Hitch a Ride is easily one of my favorite songs on this album, and not one that was played on the radio too much when I was a kid, if at all. But I like its placement on this album because you get you get 3 straight up rockers on the first side, straight up rockers on side 2 for 2 tracks, and then Hitch a Ride just a tiny bit down in tone, which kind of sets up the next 2 songs after that. But it kind of opens with that More Than a Feeling acoustic rock vibe again. But the really expressive drums on this thing, and there are moments where it builds up and goes crazy as well, but there's more chill moments throughout it, which I think give more of a focus on their softer harmonies and vocals, to show that they're more dynamic than just a bunch of guys who can scream in unison very, very well. To show that they were more than that, which I think is really cool. But and then Something About You is an absolutely great song, just a total pop rock smash. You know, the got to have you, and then they break. You know, there's so many cool breaks throughout this album, which I think is really effective, because if you're gonna have a big rock album with lots of hooks, having those breaks and those shifts help keep the construction of the song fresh. So when you've got a sound like they do, and their sound is through every one of these songs, having those different breaks pop up every once in a while keeps it exciting, and so you don't get to the point by the end of the album where you're like, wow, every song sounds the same. It doesn't, because there's elements of like, all right, this song's got an organ solo for a long time, this one's got more of a drum focus, this one's mostly acoustic, this one's a little more chill, so there are changes throughout this album that happen that keep it exciting, but also keep it in that same cohesive feel the whole time. So that said, Something About You is easily one of my favorites. I love the build-ups, I love the chorus, I love the emotion, I love the drama to it. Really, really nice vocals, the guitars are sharp and really like in your face, which apparently Tom had turned all the guitars up when he was doing this mixing, and some of the other guys had to turn them down so they didn't obscure the vocals. But very cool track. And then Let Me Take You Home Tonight, easily one of my favorite songs on this album as well. The whole album is like my favorite song, but this song is really cool. I just like that, with you tonight. I can't sing like Boston, but when they get to those parts, you know, it's just a really fun song. I think so much of pop music and rock music's problem these days is that the fun is gone. There's no element of like, we're having a good time. There's no element of like, we know we're good, but we're just gonna have fun because that's what makes us good. Everyone these days is so bloody pretentious, and they have to be like this serious rock band and write serious songs, and like they're a drag. They're a well-known drag. You turn the sound down and say rude things about them. So like for all you Beatles fans out there, you understood that reference. But that's something that's just gone, and that's what I like about 70s rock, because you come out of the 60s where, like, you know, there was a really good polish to like the early 60s stuff. Then they got a little psychedelic in the late 70s, where things kind of got expansive, and then it got really far out and really wide-reaching in the early mid 70s before eventually punk came out and said, "Screw you guys, we're going back to 2 minutes and 2 chords." So this album, you know, really wraps up like an epic era of rock and roll. And I love the shifts on this thing. I love the fun. I love the total amazing musicianship. I mean, these are some top-notch players, even if it's just Tom doing the whole thing himself for the most part. You know, the other guys were on there as well, but just a smash of an album. I mean, it really is just a smash of an album. And the thing is, like, I can go into more detail about each song, but it's one of those albums that speaks for itself. And I feel like if I were to talk super deeply about each song, it would take away from the fun of it. And I don't want to do that, because that's what makes this album so special. But check this out. It's on the Orange Epic label, which I think is really, really cool. You don't see that too much, but that's pretty fun. So yeah, I mean, there's not much else I can say about this thing. And easily, if I had to give it a score, this would be a 10 out of 10 album for me, hands down. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised by that, but you know, I didn't grow up in this time, so I didn't hear it on the radio all the time, like in the 70s, but I heard it on the radio all the time growing up in the 2000s. So for me, when I was driving around in high school with the classic rock radio on, I never changed the station when Boston came on. I liked their melodies, I liked their harmonies, I liked the big rock riffs. You can headbang to it, but also sing along. That's a really cool combination. I mean, there's classics. More Than a Feeling, Peace of Mind, the whole album is a classic. So, yeah, that's it. That's all I gotta say about this thing. It's just an absolute smash of an album. 10 out of 10, hands down, all day, man. So, that's it. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with Boston. Boston. They were just another rock band out of Boston. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.